Hello, I'm Cheryl Meyer, and I'm otherwise known as Cheryl M. Health Muse. And what my goal is to inspire you to lead a healthier life. So when I proposed my podcast, I proposed that we present it in two different segments. The first one is It Feels Good to Feel Good, Future-Proof Your Health, where I get to share everything I have learned to return my health back to relative wellness and to live a pain-free life in spite of the fact that I have autoimmune disease. But the second part of my podcast is this episode, and that's Tell Me Your Story, the Health Muse is in. My concept with this is it's all fine and well that you hear me tell my story, but I get a lot of, it's all fine and well that it worked for you, but it's not going to work for me. And I wanted you to hear that there are lots of people out there that have made changes in their lifestyle that have supported their health and brought them back to relative wellness. We all have a couple things in common. We all owned our own health. Whatever the doctor was suggesting we did was going on a parallel path to us making these lifestyle changes where we did things that cleaned up our toxic load. We all pay attention to our body. You'll hear jazz in the background because I want you to listen to the rhythm of your health, and I want you to pay attention to what your body is telling you. My body had been trying to tell me that I was going to topple over into toxic load for some time. I just wasn't listening. So if you clean up your lifestyle and if you listen to your body, you have a very good chance not of being deprived in any way, but returning to feeling darn good. And that's what these podcasts are really all about. So thank you for joining me. This is going to be a Tell Me Your Story, the Health Muse is in episode, and I hope you enjoy it, and I hope that we all inspire you to lead a healthier, happier life. Thank you.
Welcome to another edition of Tell Me Your Story, the Health Muse is in. And my guest today is particularly special to me. I want to introduce you to Dr. Suki Stone. I love her as if she's family. And she has created a program to teach children who have been unable to learn to read from traditional approaches like phonics or like in the elementary school system. She has created her own Read, Write, Lead program that I have had the pleasure in watching her get children in 14 days or less to suddenly acquire a fascination for reading and reading skills, sometimes even above the grade level that they're at when they couldn't read at all before she met them. So she has a very interesting story to share of her own in terms of how she got involved in this and why she ended up being so passionate about this. And then I want her to share some of her stories of the lives she's changed because of her Read, Write, Lead program with children who were frustrated, beyond frustrated. They might have had dyslexia. They might have had some other like ADHD going on, but whatever it was, when Dr. Stone gets down low, connects with the child, in 14 days or less, she's able to give them the beginning reading skills to change their life. So if you know anybody who is a parent that has a child that's frustrated with the inability to read, then make sure that you share this podcast with them because it's a game changer. Okay, let me read you Suki's bio. Dr. Suki Stone is a graduate at Claremont Graduate University with an emphasis in special education. As a literary specialist, she created a program, Write, Read, Lead, to provide an opportunity for both children and adults with dyslexia to achieve proficient reading skills in 14 days or less. Her corporation is a nonprofit and she's looking to collaborate with other organizations that have a need to help children and adults read proficiently. Her vision is to train teachers to use her program and work with corporations who will provide a right read lead as a literary health benefit from HR departments for their employees' children to master reading with grade level proficiency. She's seeking people who are angel backers and want to financially provide funding to help her vision of eradicating illiteracy in the country. And she wants to empower minds, one reader at a time. I'll put all the information on how you would find Dr. Stone under this podcast so that you can contact her. This is important for you if you know somebody who could use what Dr. Stone can help them do. And then she's looking for people who want to collaborate to help her fund teachers so that she can get this program out so that she can eradicate illiteracy all the way around. Okay. I am so happy to introduce you to my friend, Dr. Suki Stone. Welcome, Dr. Suki. I am so thrilled to have you here.
This is such a joy. I'm just getting chills. I just really, really, really am so happy to be here to share my story and to maybe hope that I can answer some questions of people that are listening to the podcast and want to get in touch with me. But I really honor you for inviting me to be on your podcast.
Well, I support your work. Suki, which we'll talk about at the end of this podcast, has a magazine coming out that you're all going to be able to get a digital copy of for free. And I've written some articles to help the health of the children so that they're in the right physical shape that they can actually learn. But the important part, the magic, is the way that Dr. Stone gets low, connects with the child, and then breaks through the frustration so that they can start to read. So before we go into what her program is and why it's different, I want Dr. Suki to tell us a little bit about her upbringing and what it was like when she was a child and what things she had to deal with. So why don't you start with telling us your story, Dr. Stone?
Okay, I sort of will. I'm going to kind of make it condensed because I'm old now. And when I was born with a paralysis that was not really recognized. And I struggled with things physically. And it was only on one side of my body, but I actually had to teach myself everything that I had to do because I didn't have the flexibility and I didn't have the physicality to actually walk and to actually use both of my hands. So I had to do things that were different. And I would look at something as I got older. And then I would evaluate, okay, how do I do this? And so my mom, as a very supportive mom, my dad was supportive too, but my mom, as a very supportive mom, would say to me, in those days, girls were in the kitchen. So I go way back. So at 5 years old, my dad sent me in the kitchen to help my mom. And I could help her with very few things, but she would say to me, I can give you silverware and you can set the table, because I could use my one hand really, really well. And then she would ask me to watch her do things, and she'd say, watch what I do and then figure it out for yourself. So my whole life was making sure that I could figure it out for myself. And
I think that the gift in that was you learned to think outside the 9 dots as a very small child, because you couldn't do things the way everybody else did because you only had one functioning hand. So everything you did was figuring out outside of the norm how to be as proficient as children who could do it the regular way. And I think that was a big step in terms of what you developed for these children who were frustrated and unable to learn. Okay, excuse me for interrupting. I turn
No,
it back to you.
that's really bright. I want to take you on the road with me. That's how bright that is. I couldn't have actually summarized it better myself. That was very, very, just listening to you. That really kind of like encapsulated my whole life experience. The interesting part to me to even reflect on myself is the fact that I did have the internal perseverance to overcome it. So that if I struggled at it and it's not like failing and overcoming a failure, because I didn't fail at anything.
Right.
My family made me available things so that I would succeed. I just had to figure out my own way to do that. And it was a matter of saying, okay, I don't care how much time it takes me or how I have to go, as you also call it, out of the box to actually learn what I need to know or learn how to do something that I knew neither one of my parents or even my brothers couldn't help me accomplish. And it gave me the oomph, I don't know how you say it, but to just go ahead and say, I will accomplish this. I will do this. I will figure it out. And that happened with many things that, in school, it wasn't about telling the teachers I would figure it out. It was more at home because they understood that I had that, I want to say, maybe my spirited side to be able to know, okay, how do I go about doing this? And I just did. And so it became kind of like I don't know how I describe it, but like a direct direction that when I was handed something, it was just understood. You this is what you have. Now you do it the way you need to do it. So I learned way late in life. I think it was only like maybe 10 years ago that my brother said, my brother's 4 years younger than me. And he said, there were two things I learned from you that I really loved. And you taught me. One was making a fried egg, and the other was tying my shoe. And I must have had some kind of way to use my hand so that I could hold, because I did not tie my shoe with one hand, but that I could use the other. But I always had to like get help. Even sometimes, like now, if I put my hand on the steering wheel, sometimes I have to move it so that it goes up there. So maybe it was, but I was really surprised when he said that I taught him how to tie a shoe, because that was a difficult task for me. And I overcame that task. And there were most things that I had to do. And I still have to do those things where I have to look at something and say, how do I go about doing this? Or how do I balance, and I've had as an adult the opportunity for personal fitness. So I was able to the barbells, the dumbbells, whatever the big things. I was able to lift it and walk with it. And it started with like maybe 1 pound and then 2 pounds. And then, and then one day I decided I had more than one grocery bag. And I thought, can I lift this grocery bag? And it was like, yeah, I can lift this grocery bag. So I just like surprised myself. It's sort of like entertaining myself kind of. But that's the way that I've learned that, I guess, depending on what it is. But I think that with a lot of perseverance and a lot of stick-to-itiveness, people can really overcome anything.
And you grew up knowing that anything was possible for you, whether it appeared that it was or not.
Yes, I did.
You had the mindset Okay. I want to get from A to B, and I'm going to figure it out because I can figure out there is a way that I'm going to go from A to B. And all this fits in later in your life to how you learn to believe in children and believe that all children have the right to learn to read, and all children have the possibility to learn to read. And it, didn't matter what anybody else said or anybody else was telling them. You knew that there was a way that you could work with children that would allow them to learn how to read. I don't think you ever doubted that.
No,
It probably took you a while to figure out what that way was. And then you needed your proof of concept of actually working with children to know that it really, truly does work. But you never doubted that you could do it.
No, and I was always out of the box. When I do have to say this is unrelated to the reading part, but when I had my first regular class, because I spent my whole life in special ed, but I had my first regular class, and the only thing, and we had to teach everything. Okay, we had to teach music, we had to teach PE, we had to teach dance, we had to teach all kinds of stuff. So I was doing the things I had a fourth grade class, and I had two children. One was obviously had some intellectual difficulty, and then the other child was what we would call a slow learner. But the one that I had Down syndrome. So I had one of each in my class, and I worked with them and did things that like sort of surprised me. But all of my kids were complaining that I didn't give them physical education. And what did they want? They didn't want exercise. They didn't want fitness. Like in those days there was no fitness, but they wanted to play a game. So I fixed out the game that was great for me. I did spelling, where they held the ball and like dodgeball, but they threw it and somebody else caught it, and then they could keep the ball to throw back if they could spell a word. So I always did things differently than anybody else did them. It just happened that way. So the kids sort of like asked me, we want to play like a team thing. This wasn't really a team, it was the whole class. And I thought, the only thing that I know is my wonderful whistle that I had to buy when I was in school as a teacher for the first time. And I loved blowing my whistle, but I didn't have the slightest idea. They wanted me to teach them how to play basketball. And I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to do that? I can't even play basketball. So I studied and I went, and the very, very first basketball game we had, they picked teams. Well, I didn't really know about picking teams, but I did know that one basketball, my two low children were the last picked. And I was always the last picked in school. So I wasn't going to do that to my children. And I thought, the next time I do this, and I may never do it again, but the next time they play basketball, I'm going to find a different way for them to pick teams. And we didn't go back to basketball until my brightest star said, Miss Stone, we want to play basketball again. We had fun. I went, okay, how are they going to pick teams? I wanted these kids to be included. So I took both of my low kids and I made them team captains. So all the kids in the class were raising their hands to say, pick me, pick me. And they became the team captains for all of the basketball games we played. And one of the things that happened from this, and it really was really special for me, the smartest kid in my class, the gifted child, we did like, we called them jolly jaunts, like little trips we were allowed to take, and we called them jolly jaunts. And so we would visit a grocery store, or we would visit, like the zoo or something that was, or even a farm. I taught in Wisconsin, so we would visit even a farm. And the kid said to me at our next trip, he said, Miss Stone, he said, I have a favor to ask. Do you think that I could be uh, Aaron's partner? And Aaron was my little retarded child, my little intellectually disabled child. And I said, yes, I said, that would be wonderful. But how come you? And he said, well, when we were playing basketball, I got to know him, and he and I like the same baseball team. And I want to learn more about him. And I said, oh my God, this is like changing the lives of these children. And even the parents called me and said, my son has a new friend. And that really, really warmed my heart, because I just did that because I knew intuitively and spiritually that these kids needed to feel like they were a part of the whole group, or that they needed to feel that they were included. And it was a way for me to just be happy that the child himself came and asked me. So he learned so much, and he helped him.
So share with me how you went from being an elementary school teacher to being somebody who was interested in teaching the ones that could not read from the traditional way that reading was taught. You obviously started noodling on how you were going to help those children become readers too, knowing that the traditional approach was not going to work.
Well, first I got my master's degree and I specialized in reading. And then what happened to me was I realized that the kids that struggled, I learned about dyslexia in my master's program. That was a whole thing. The kids, this is just a little piece of history trivia, but in growing up years before 1973, actually 1975, but between 1973 and 75, if you had a child that was disabled, you were told by the school districts that your child would have to be taught at home. They were not allowed to attend school because there were no special ed classes. They had one special ed class, and that is if the child was intellectually deficient and had some kind of retardation. That's the only class they had. So they didn't have deaf classes. They didn't have any kind of classes for learning disability. That was like not even a term that, But in my master's degree, I met the woman, Janet Lerner, who wrote the first book on learning disabilities. And I met her in Chicago. And my job after, there was a whole set of criteria to specialize to say that this child has learning disabilities. And my job when I got out of school as a special ed teacher was to identify the children with learning disabilities in every class in the classroom. So there was a low amount, like maybe 5 or 6 students, but there was criteria that I did and testing I did. So I was actually a diagnostician. I wasn't a teacher. But then when I started, after we diagnosed these children, then I started to actually teach curriculum. And again, another out of the box thing for me. I wrote my own curriculum. And I just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. And these children were learning to read. But it wasn't the same as the traditional thing. And I made it a little bit different, but it wasn't what I have now. And I decided that I would focus on reading. So I didn't become a reading specialist, like to go back to school and be a reading specialist. But I can't, after Wisconsin, I got a job in California, in San Diego, and I was working with a group of special ed kids, and I was working with their material. By that time, they actually developed a publishing company for special ed. And so I could order special ed things. But these special ed things weren't as effective with my children. They still had the phonics component. So
Well, and I want you to explain that tell people what the traditional phonics approach to reading is, and then we'll explain to them how your program has nothing to do with that and why it doesn't work for all children. All children do not learn the same.
Absolutely. What happens with phonics is that the foundation says, in order to learn to read, you have to be able to know what they call the sound symbol relationship. So every letter has a sound. The V has a V sound. The P has a P sound. And the vowels also have those kind of sounds. And phonics says you learn the sounds, then you put the sounds together to make a word. So like they say cat. Well, cat has also a C and a K sound, but they don't distinguish that. And that's another thing about phonics that's difficult for, and I'm going to call them my children. Very, very difficult, because over the years, I've learned that my children or children with dyslexia or who really, really struggle with reading per se, do not have auditory discrimination. So they don't know that a P has a P sound. They can't see, they can't hear that sound. And it has nothing to do with their hearing. It has to do with perceiving what that sound is and putting it together with other sounds. The biggest thing that I learned from listening and trying the phonics with the children, because that was what I was given, was the fact the vowel sounds. They could never distinguish the long O or the long A from the short O or the short A. And also, what happens, and this kind of bothered me a lot, but what happens with the phonics is that there are so many exceptions. I'm not getting emotional about that because I'm furious with it. They want to teach all the exceptions from and separate it from the phonics. But then what they do, so they're going to teach, okay, they're going to teach, let's give you an example. They're going to teach the O sound for home. Okay, it's an O. And then you have dome. Okay, so you have like rhyming words. But then they have something called a dolch word. And a dolch word is that word that is they call them sight words, but they call them dolch because a man by the name of Dolch created the dolch words. And they're words like the and when and mother, father, they, these kind of words. And they want the children to read them like this. So it's very hard for them because they want to sound out everything, because they're learning phonics is to sound out everything. But I want to go back to my O story, where now they come in with the word come. And come has C-O-M-E, like home and dome, but it's come. So there's so many exceptions, the children get confused. And I have to give up on this and say something more, something better, something easier has to come from, where they can feel confident that they can read. So one of the things that happened to me is I had this child, Julie. This is the beginning of my program, and I didn't know. But no matter what she did, she broke my pencils. I had to put a a tissue box on her desk because every time she did anything to do with reading, she would begin to cry and she had to blow her nose. I wanted to make sure that Julie learned to read. So I was so frustrated. I went home and I said, I better meditate on this. I better figure out. I figured out for myself. I can figure out for Julie. And it may not be as easy as it was for myself, although I have to tell you, it wasn't easy for myself either. But I just had to do it because it was just me. I wasn't doing it.
And you started from the point that you knew you were going to be able to do it, which Julie did not have that at her beginning. Julie believed that she could not do it.
And all the teachers told her she couldn't do it. And so her belief came from a whole different place. So I was home meditating and I thought, okay, I've learned so much from my master's degree. What can I put together? How can I teach Julie to read? So I knew in my master's program that I was doing holistic constructivist. Everything was whole. And I learned about the theories behind holistic stuff. And so I came to, and I love to be, I have to tell you, you know that about me, but I love to be dramatic. And I came into the class and Julie was obedient. I had little cubby holes for the kids. So they would come into the classroom. They were in resource, meaning that they didn't see me all day. Julie saw me for 3 hours. That was the maximum. But my other kids saw me an hour and then maybe 2 hours. So in the morning, I had like 10 kids, and then maybe the first hour, and then maybe the second hour, there were only 4 kids. And then the third hour, there were 12 kids. So it varied. So she came in and every morning and she took out her stuff from her cubby and she started to work. And I came home after being home. I came into class after my meditation and I said to Julie, and I did, I went to her desk and I took my hand and I threw everything up. And here these 9 other kids are looking at me like, Miss Stone, did you go nuts? And I said, today, Julie, you're going to learn to read. And she just looked at me and she said, okay. And then she wiped her eyes. It's like she was still crying, And I said, this is what I want you to do. I said, I have a whole stack of magazines and we're going to read. I didn't know at the time that these were passions. This evolved, but I started with the consonants and I started with a B. And I said, I want you to look at everything that you love in these magazines. And I want you to cut out pictures of and we'll make a collage. And I showed her, I spelled the word collage for her. And I said, that means it's got to have a whole bunch of pictures and there can be B's in the middle. You can have all kinds of, words. It doesn't have to be a B at the beginning or a B at the end. So she cut out a picture of a Security Pacific Bank. And then she cut out a picture of a butterfly. And then she cut out a picture of a balloon. And she cut out all kinds of pictures that had B's in them. And we started, so I took notes for her. And I wrote down everything we talked about. And I said, okay, tell me what a bank is. And she says, where you keep money. So I wrote, where you keep money. I did the holistic thing. Or I said, well, who do you give your money to? And she said, the teller. So I wrote the word teller down. I didn't ask her about the vowels and the consonants, everything. And then I had her read it. What is this? Teller. What is this? A bank is where you put your money. So she read the sentence. And then I pulled out the word money and I said, what word is this? And she said, money. And I said, tell me what money is. And she said, my dad earns it when he has his job. And we use it to buy things. So she knew conceptually. And then we were going to move on to the next B picture. And I don't know where I was going, butterfly or balloon. And she said, but Miss Stone, there's another kind of bank. And I'm waiting like, oh my gosh, a bank? Okay. I said, what other kind of bank, Julie? And she said, well, when you go fishing, you sit on a bank. And I went, oh my gosh, how do you know that? And she said, my father takes me fishing every weekend. And I said to myself, I said, that's it. Their personal knowledge is going to teach them to read. And what happened was, again, I was looking at system. So we did 3 stories of B's. We did 3 stories of C's. By the time she got to the letter L, she could read in her 2nd grade book that all the other kids could read, but she couldn't. So I said, let's go back to your classroom and let's show the other children and your teacher that you can read from the 2nd grade book, because everybody in her class knew that she couldn't read. And they knew that that's why she was coming to Miss Stone, because she couldn't read. So we went there and I gave her the book, and all the kids were sitting down, and they were sitting, like Indian style, and just being, and she read a whole page in the chapter that they were on for the reading. And they stood up. I wish there had been cell phones at that time. Even, cameras weren't around for that
Right.
thing. But all the children stood up and gave her a standing ovation. And it was so exciting. I think there were good crying tears in her eyes. But she said to the children, she said, I want to tell you, she said, I need to tell you the very important thing I brought as my show and tell. She said, I want to introduce you to Miss Stone because she taught me to read. And I came over and Mary Ann was like shocked. I mean, it was like so exciting, that she actually introduced me as the show and tell. They knew about me, but they didn't know. So she said, that's how I learned to read. So what I did, because I knew that I wanted nothing to do with letters of the alphabet or sounds, I knew that she was going to learn to read by her passions, by things that she loved, and everything was going to be holistic. So what
and she was obviously visual, not auditory.
Yes. And that's what happens with, I would say, 90% of the children, that they are more visual than they are auditory. I learned something in my master's class about a woman. Her name was Grace Fernald, and she taught reading and language and all kinds of things through multisensory approach. So along with Janet Lerner, who wrote the first book on learning disabilities, and other people that I took as my researchers, Grace Fernald does the thing of the sand trade. And I must tell you, this is really important for me. I did create this program, but it was the help of 5 researchers that I chose to put together. And I want to make sure that each one of those researchers is acknowledged. I don't think any of them are around anymore, but they need to be acknowledged. What happened to me one time, and I'm just going to veer off a little bit. I was gifted with an opportunity to see a presentation for reading through my friend, who was the director of special ed in San Marcos. And she said, I want you to come and I want you to see this. Well, they had big, huge binders, and all the binders were filled with all kinds of activities that talked about the sand tray and talked about tracing in the sand tray. And I raised my hand and said, can you tell me a little bit more about that? And the woman was not even the one that had created that reading thing. She said, well, you have to call the people that created it. I don't know. And I turned to my colleague that invited me, and I said, that was Grace Fernald, and she's taking it from Grace Fernald, and that's not moral. And whether it's legal or not wasn't my point. So I make sure that I let people know that Grace Fernald was a part of what I do with the children, and that I have my 5 researchers. The anchor of my research is Paulo Freire, and I met him during my time with in my doctoral program. My advisor invited him to come from Chile. He had been in exile, and when he told us how he taught the migrant workers to read, and that they had this knowledge and this passion, and they learned to read, and they ended up, I'm not doing anything political here, but they ended up overthrowing the government because they were prevented from reading, so they couldn't vote for the things they wanted to vote for. And he came and he taught all kinds of teachers throughout the United States. And he came to us in Claremont, and his whole thing was about their ability to have knowledge, to know things, to have passions, and to have vocabulary beyond what you ever think they could have. And so I use Paulo Freire's work as my anchor. And Roach Van Allen says, what you think you can say, what you say you can write, what you write you can read. So I use his, that's language experience, and it's been used in kindergarten and sometimes in first grade. But for me, I use it even with my adults. They dictate and I write. And the reason is I know they know words, but I want them to know and choose different words. I remember when I had a little girl, and I teach the thesaurus, that's another, but I had a little girl that was always saying, I'm happy about this, I'm happy about this. So she didn't have any other word to use other than happy. And I opened the thesaurus and I read her, she was a second grader also, but she didn't know how to read anything. I read her the words and I had her choose, and her favorite word was jazzed. So she said, I am jazzed about reading. It was so cool. It was wonderful. So I teach them these things. So that's that. Roach Van Allen was my other one. And then I have a very, very important, well, Grace Fernald is my spelling. Not just, she's part of the reading, but she's my spelling because I teach spelling by memory. And I teach spelling by memory for one reason and one reason only. There's so many sounds and differentiations of sounds that when you ask kids to sound it out, they would take a French word bureau and write B-U-R-O, and they would misspell. And so I use the sand tray and the multi-dimensional in order to get them to say it out loud, to see it, to write it. And that's how they, can do their spelling words. And then I also use, so it's Roach Van Allen, it's Paulo. Robert Sweet is he worked for the government at the Institutes of Health, and he did education part of the institutes, and he found the research that there were 35,000 words in oral vocabulary of most all children, unless they're deaf, of most all children before they even get to school. And today, I would say it's more than 35,000 because of our technology. You know, the children today at 3 years old know the difference between a mouse that's a rodent and a mouse that you use for your computer.
For your computer.
Right. So words all the time are changing. And I use that skill. They come with that knowledge. They come with, and I have to tell you, I again, I have this little story. It's a story not about me directly, but about me understanding children coming to school with the language. So it's a story of a husband coming home from work, and his wife, and they've got a little 3-year-old at home, and Joseph's at home, and he greets his father, and the mom says, "How was your day, honey?" And he says, "It was very frustrating. I didn't anticipate that my client would not be able to do what I asked him to do." So little Joseph is listening to this, and the next day, mom comes in his room and says, "We're going to go shopping, grocery shopping, in fact, today, and I want you to pick out your own wardrobe, and I want you to dress yourself. I'm not going to dress you today." So she comes back a few minutes later, and she says, "Joseph, you're not completely dressed." He was struggling tying his shoe. And he says, "Mama, I'm frustrated because I didn't anticipate I would have difficulty tying my shoe." So those words and that vocabulary is something that they bring with themselves. So when they say to me, "I'm frustrated," they don't know how to spell it, but I do. So I write it down for them. I become their secretary. Oh, one child went home bragging to his older brother that he had a secretary at school.
Now, I want you to take all of this that you've shared and explain, when you have a child that cannot read, how do you connect with them? How do you get them to start to learn to read? Because I think that's the crucial part.
Right.
You've learned all this stuff. You have all these puzzle pieces. Now, how did you learn to implement that so that your children could be successful?
Well, what I learned from those pieces is that children do come to school with knowledge, and that their parents are their first teachers, and that comprehension of words, understanding the word frustration, and didn't anticipate whatever they didn't anticipate. The comprehension is built in. They're not just learning words through the sounds and symbols and then learning the meaning later. The meaning is integrated. The meaning is a part of that word. Why? Because they're using it. So what I do is I ask them what their favorite things are. And I did have a child tell me I didn't have any favorite things. I said, "What are you passionate about?" They know the word passion. They know the word passionate. And one little boy said, "I'm not passionate about anything." And I said, "Well, how old are you?" And he said, "I'm 7. And I said, "Well, you've had 7 years to be passionate. Isn't there anything that you really, really, really love?" And he says, "Well, I love the way my mom cooks." I said, "Okay, let's write a story about your mom cooking." He says to me, "I'm not really interested in my mom's story." I said, "What are you interested in?" He said, "Football." I said, "Okay, tell me about football. Do you play football?" He said, "At home." He said, "I want to play with the real games." And so we wrote the story about his interest in playing with the real games. It's supposed to be. So I went ahead and wrote down the things that they actually were passionate about. And after that passion, they get to choose. And they choose what they want to tell me about, and they write that story. I'm there to help them write that story. I'm there to change their vocabulary. So they might say, I like baseball. Now, I know they know the word like. I know they can spell the word like, some of them, depending on the age of the child. And I will go into the thesaurus. I like the thesaurus and it's actually the 7th edition. And this is kind of because the Roget's International Thesaurus, thumbed index, has 365,000 synonyms. And so I usually like to use the word happy, and I'll say a whole group of words and find one that is appropriate for that child. So one little girl, she was doing something, maybe playing with her Barbie dolls. And she said she was happy playing with her Barbie dolls. And we found the word in the thesaurus, glorious. She said, I like the sound of that, Dr. Stone. Let's do glorious. So she said, playing with my Barbie dolls is glorious. So they learn the vocabulary, they improve their vocabulary, and sometimes the vocabulary is advanced for their age. But I teach them things that they already know they are teaching me. And one of the things that's really important, I use the Bloom's taxonomy of hierarchy. So when you ask I'm not going to give the whole thing. This is not a class. when you ask what's the story about, that's a knowledge question. When you ask a child to rate something, you like this over this, how would you rate it and why? That's an analysis question at the top. So I use Bloom's taxonomy to give them comprehension of their stuff. And I accept any answer they give me. So I remember doing a story. This child loved going to Disneyland. So we did a story about Disneyland and his favorite place to go in Disneyland. And I said, okay, I'm going to have you rate. And I said, I put up my hand and I said, the pinky will be 1 and the thumb will be 5. And I want you to rate Disneyland. And I said, but I want you to tell me something else that you can rate, but that can't be the same as Disneyland. So what else do you want to rate? And he said, my grandma. And I said, okay, going to grandma's house. And so he said, yes. So I said, how would you rate grandma? He said a 5. And I said, no, you know, you can't rate Disneyland a 5. How would you rate Disneyland? A 4. I said, Jose, you rated Disneyland less than grandma's house? Why did you rate grandma's house? He said, because grandma's a good cook. So I accept their answer to the comprehension. I embrace what they have to say. And they learn to kind of like understand that they get choices and they don't have to answer the same way. And they don't, you know, their passions are what's most important. But they also learn new vocabulary. They learn new spelling words. If sometimes I ask them to pick. So if they pick like the easy ones, I'll say, let me pick. And depending on the age of the child now. But I did have a fourth grader want to, I love this, the word that I use for like not happy, but sort of like happy. I have a predilection, a love. I have a predilection for basketball. And this fourth grader wanted to learn to read, to spell the word predilection. So I taught him how to spell the word predilection. It's sort of like this child recently, a couple years ago, her mom wanted her to spell the word entrepreneur because she was an entrepreneur. So she knows how to spell the word entrepreneur. So I will teach beyond because I know they can go beyond. But it always starts with their interest and their passion and things that they love. And it goes from there. And
okay, so let's go back a second. You have a brand new child. This child cannot read. This child's parent calls you and tells you that every time they have to try to read, they have a tantrum, they are crying, they are frustrated, they're showing up in a poor way because they are so frustrated with the whole process of reading. And you come in, what gets their attention with you so that you can start to hear them and teach them their story?
Okay, I think that's why I am been told I'm a reading whisperer, because I will look at that child and I will say to that child, I know you're frustrated with reading, but I want to know what you love in your life. What's important to you? They may say my mommy, they may say my daddy, they may say my brother. And then I go with that and I say, what about your brother is important to you? Well, I want to take care of him. And then I would say, does your mommy, how old is your brother? Well, he's 2. Can he feed himself? Not really. Sometimes. I get to show him how to eat. So then I would say to that child, do you want to write a story about that? About your bravery to help your brother? So they hear me using big words. They know what they mean. And they also know, and that's why we do it one-on-one, definitely, but they have my 100% attention.
Yeah, one of the things I loved when I watched you teaching a child was that child was the only person in the room. Didn't matter if there were other people or there. You got down low at the same level as the child, and your heart and your mind and your words spoke to that child all at the same time. So they were 100% in your presence because they were getting the attention that they so sorely needed, that erased whatever that frustration was almost from the very beginning. So that somebody who's teaching phonics is frustrated with the child, and the child picks up that they're frustrated with the child because the child is not succeeding at learning phonics. And you walk in and you want to hear them tell you a story, and you're down low and you're giving them confidence because you're connecting on a level that is 100% acceptance.
Yes.
Which is not what phonics is. And I do believe from the bottom of my heart that that's one reason why you can connect with these children who have not been able to succeed under any other system, but you can connect with them and start to build trust and then teach them so that they're completely different little human beings when you leave them.
And they also teach me.
So oh, I'm sure.
They are sharing their life with me, and they know that I pay attention to what they say. I asked them authentic questions, you know, like when I said to Jose, you, your grandmother rated, I love her cooking. Well, that was not the end of the story. I said to him, what's good about her cooking? Oh, everything smells good. So they have this dialogue between us that they see they have something to offer me, and that they know that I'm interested in them while they are learning to.
So now share a couple of examples of children whose lives you have changed because you have gone to work with them for 14 days. What amazes me is this child hasn't been able to read, and suddenly in 14 days, this child is a completely changed human being who can read when you leave them. So give us a couple of examples of what you've accomplished.
I have my very, they're all special, but my very special one was of Gio. Gio was a second grader, and he only knew 6 letters of the alphabet. So no phonics, I mean, nothing, just 6 letters of the alphabet. And I worked with him, and he's the one that I ended actually on television with Kimberly Hunt, who did our story. His first story he ever wrote was about the wedding that he attended with his, and then playing Padres. He did a book on the Padres. But today he has a bachelor's degree in business from Arizona State University, and he's back in San Diego, and this is really cool. He wasn't sure what he was going to do, so he was working for the church, and he was doing extra things for the church. And so he was in charge of all kinds of things coming into the church. And Cisco Foods was delivering stuff, and Gio was in charge of whatever the deliveries were. And the guy that was driving the truck approached him one day and said, Gio, I want you to interview for a job at Cisco. They love you, and we would love to have you on our team. And he interviewed, and today he is managing 5 restaurants hired by Cisco to do all of the management of these restaurants.
So he went from only knowing 5 words to learning how to read from you, going on to get his college education, and then getting a great job where he is a leader and a manager for Cisco Foods.
Yes, yes.
Now, had he not met you, what do you think would have happened if phonics was his only option?
Well, he wouldn't have, he would not have improved, and he would not have gained. He probably wouldn't have been able to go to college. There was no, what do I want? Just future for him. There was no future for him. He didn't see a future. His parents didn't see a future.
And he didn't believe in himself.
And he didn't believe in himself. No. And after, on the video from Kimberly, after his brother said that he was sitting at the light, he was sitting in the corner in his room. He has one of those lights that goes from ceiling so that it can shine on him, and he sits in a chair and he reads. Like, he can read everything and anything. And he told me, he said, I'm now managing 5 restaurants, and having his bachelor's degree in business. I mean, that's fantastic. That's absolutely fantastic. And I'm so proud of him. It's just wonderful that he's doing what he's doing. And Manny, I have, he's going to be in my Write, Read, Lead magazine. He was a 9th grader, and he had severe dyslexia, but he internally knew that he wanted to go to college, and he knew that if he stayed in the special ed, that he wouldn't be able to go to college. So he was kind of like trying to get them to let go of him, but he was still struggling, and he was still doing, I mean, his dyslexia, doesn't go away. And he was referred to me, and his mom said, I don't know if this is going to work for me. I don't think so. And Manny's book, when they finished my program, the thing between my program and actually performing in school is a book that they want to read, that they've struggled and that they can't read or couldn't read. And in his English class, he was doing Diary of Anne Frank. And the teacher was very understanding and allowed him to watch the videos instead of read the book. So he said at the end of the program, he said, Dr. Stone, I would really like to read the Diary of Anne Frank. It's fascinating for me, and I wasn't able to read the book. But with you, now with the transfer, I can read the book. And we read about 5-6 chapters of the book, and he finished it on his own. And now Manny not only has a bachelor's degree in education, he is enrolled in a master's degree in education. And he's a head teacher for a preschool private school. And he wants to get his master's degree and be a manager in education. Now, he didn't start out that way. He wanted to be a nurse. So he went and got a certificate as a phlebotomist. And then he decided that that wasn't the direction that he wanted. And while he was actually attending some medical classes, he took a class in child development and fell in love. And so that's how he made the transition. But not going to college, not being able to read, he never would have done that. And he said, he doesn't lose his dyslexia. It doesn't go away, but he's overcome it. So he's really excited about that.
And tell us the story. There's a grandmother on your website who could not believe the miraculous change in her granddaughter, who was unbelievably frustrated all the time. And they took a shot and brought you in. Tell us that story.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story. The child really, really, really struggled. And everybody thought that she was just going to do okay. Nobody really identified until her dyslexia, until her mother went and took her testing and stuff, and then found out that she had dyslexia, but wasn't able to work with her. And I love Maddie's story is great. I just love Maddie's story. She actually brought 2 books with her, one that she was reading with her grandma and one that she was going to read with me at the end. She wrote fabulous stories, just really creative stories. And she also, her mom wanted her in the performing arts school, because it was like, she loves to dance and loves to do all these things, but they weren't sure because of the reading. They weren't sure of other schools because of the reading. And she's
Let me interrupt you 1 second. When you said that she had a book that she brought that she was reading with her grandmother, and she told fabulous stories. She wrote fabulous stories. Was she putting them on paper, or was she verbally telling you about stories?
No. That my program, she would tell me a story, and then and it was about her passion, and then I would write that. That was my program. But at the end of the program, when the program ended, and she actually scored, I don't like to talk about test scores of kids, but she actually scored above her grade level. So before the program started, her grandmother asked me, or I asked her, what would she like? What kind? So I suggested certain books for her to buy. And they were chapter books. She never could read a chapter book. That was her most important thing that she wanted to do, was read a chapter book. And so we're reading this chapter book. And by the way, I want to correct it. She was reading the other chapter book with her grandmother after she had my class. They brought the books after, and she, just incredible stories she wrote. But she's reading with me, and she says to me, Dr. Stone, I think this author must be friends with the other author from the book I'm reading with Mimi. And I said, Maddie, why? And she said, because they use the same words and even use the same sentence. She was able to identify the sentence in one of the chapters we were reading as the exact same sentence in a different story by a different author that she was reading with her grandmother. Unbelievable. But one of the things that happened because of her improvement in reading, that and I did guide her mom. They were going to do a walkthrough for in this performing arts school, but she was on a list, and I said, she could be on a list for 2 or 3 years. I said, what I want you to do is I want you to bring her portfolio when you go and take a walk through the school. And they walked through with the dean of the school. It's a private school, but public. I mean, like a performing arts, but public. And after the thing was over, she said to the woman, she said, I brought Maddie's portfolio that I thought maybe you would like to take a look at. And she opened the portfolio, and she had done some written work as well, but it was drawings and things like that. And she said to Allison, this was like before Christmas. And she said to Allison, we can enroll Maddie first week in January. And she's been there ever since. And that's been amazing, absolutely amazing. I have another story. Well, I have more than, I have several stories. I do want to tell my adult story. This man was 33, and he didn't have spelling skills and no writing skills. And he worked his way up, and he was a high school diploma, but no college, and no interest in college, and not really interested in reading. But he wanted to be a manager of Enterprise Rent-A-Car. And his boss told him that he could never be a manager because he didn't have the spelling skills and the writing skills. So he found me, and we started to work. And he ended up telling his boss that he was taking my class, and there was an opportunity to interview for a manager's job in a very small office for Enterprise. And he calls me up, and he has to cancel class. And I said, okay, we'll rearrange. And he said, well, my manager, I told him I was taking your class, and he's offered me an opportunity to interview for a manager's job for Enterprise Rent-A-Car. And I said, that's all I want to know. Call me after the interview and tell me how the interview went. And he calls me at 8 o'clock. And we still had classes left. He was only about seven classes in. And there was like 14 classes, so 12 classes, 14 classes. And he called me up, and he said, Dr. Stone, I got the job. He got the job as a manager of a small Enterprise Rent-A-Car before he even finished my class. And today, he has been in management for almost 20 some years. He was a manager for Enterprise Rent-A-Car for 17 years and manager of Coca-Cola for 8 years. And now he's managing his friend's private bottle company or something. And it was wonderful that he was able to actually have that job. One more, I got to do 2 or 3 more kids, but one more that was really powerful. I met a woman who was 57 years old. And we were in a seminar together. And she was going to go home because she couldn't read. I didn't know that, but we were in the group together. And she put her hands on me because that was a thing that the group said. And I thought, oh my God, what do you do? And she says, I'm a massage therapist, but I can't make a living. That's all I knew. I didn't know until the end that she said, I'm 57 years old and I can't get money for my massage because I don't have a credential, a certificate going to massage school, and I can't go to massage school because I can't read. She came down to San Diego for 2 weekends. And after my program, she enrolled in massage school and built a career for herself for 20 years. And now she's like retired, but she could actually earn a living because she actually had that certificate. And she was also in the women's group for church, and she couldn't read the Bible passages. And they made all the women like read them orally. And she said after my program, she only needed help with 3 words in the Bible passage. So that was like really, 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 really cool. Now, my other example of this incredible child who learned to spell the word entrepreneur, frustrated as a reader, could not read, didn't want to read, just frustrated as a reader. She told me one of the first stories that she wanted to read, to write, was how she loved to be an entrepreneur and what an entrepreneur was. She talked about going with her dad to find a corner in the neighborhood to be able to set up a lemonade stand. And she even told me the secret ingredient in her lemonade mix. But she said that
And how old was this child?
Oh, 9.
9.
9. Yeah, she's 9 years old. And but I think she was like between 7 and 8 when she was this entrepreneur. And she said she went to all these different corners and she stayed like 15 or so minutes. And to find the first, to find which corner she wanted that she could earn enough money, she watched the walkers. She said, you know, Dr. Stone, there's a lot of old people walking this neighborhood. The bikers, the people, how many cars? She counted for 15 minutes how many cars passed the intersection. Bright child, brilliant child. And then she looked at all 4 corners and she said, I picked the corner that had the most people combined, whether they were walkers or travelers. I had people stop from their cars and pull over so that they could have some lemonade. And then she said one of the walkers, though, she was really nice. She put in a $20 bill and didn't take any lemonade. I said, why do you think she didn't take any lemonade? She said, Dr. Stone, she said, that woman can't walk and drink lemonade at the same time.
So she needed to learn to read so that she could run her business because she was doing all of this visually. She knew what she wanted to achieve, but she couldn't read, she couldn't write.
Right. And the other thing is she wants to be an author as well. So she wrote me the beginning, the first page of her chapter 1. And the book is going to be entitled Love. I love my family. And I think that it's going to be, for me, the very first children's book. We probably will put it out in comic strip form, but she's really excited about being an author and writing her own book. And I have to go there with you. She asked the teacher if she could write a, and the teacher said no. She said, "Can I write my book?" She said no.
Yeah.
So
you open up possibilities for these children. And that's
like,
what makes your program special.
Yeah. And I don't say no. I did say no once, but I'm not going to say it on a podcast. So one of the guys that was in prison, he was before he was 18. Okay. He didn't read, and the judge asked me to teach him to read. And he got in jail because of drugs. So he wanted to write a story related. And I said, no, you can't do that. I said, think about when you were 8. He was 17. I said, think about when you were 8. And what did you do? He lived in Mexico and he rode horses on the beach. And that became his story. And he promised me that he would stay, one thing that I was really touched by was he bought me and made his own card, for thank you card, for teaching him to read. And he was this, big guy, and he said he learned a lot and that he really, appreciated that. So many, 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 many stories. And I want to have many more. My objective, now I'm not here for a very long time because it's taking me a long time. And I joke about the fact that maybe the people that were supposed to help me weren't born yet. So that's why it's taking me a long time. But my collaboration is with other nonprofits, and funding is needed so that I can work with all these children. I will also do something that most people don't do when they're being taught for my teacher training. I will actually train with them so that when a child says, oh, I don't have any passions, I can actually model what that teacher needs to bring out to them so that he can say, oh, sure, I love baseball, or I love, helping my dad with the car, or my favorite game to play is one of the, the things that the computer games that they have. So I need to let people know that I want to leave a legacy of having all these children that didn't believe in themselves know that they can read and fulfill their own dreams. And they can maybe be educators, be business people, be entrepreneurs. I'm working with, I'm hoping I can, Shantae and I from Texas is helping this woman with her nonprofit. And she told Annie about my reading program. And Annie said, I want it for all these Dallas children, and they're going to be entrepreneurs. And so I want to be able to help these children and be able to teach teachers so that I can leave a legacy, and that it will continue to help children that have given up on themselves,
right,
as well as having other people give up on them. And funding is a big thing. Now I have, and I'm very happy, I do have 4 nonprofits that are very interested in collaborating with me. They're all over, but I want more, and I'm looking definitely for businesses, large businesses, or even small businesses that would help financially so that their employees would be able to have their children have the advantage. You know, they have health benefits for the family, so they have health benefits for their children. Maybe a health benefit could be literacy, and then a child could take off after only 14 days. And
So
I
you're
can't,
looking for two things at this stage in your life. You're looking for children that you can go work with directly, and you're looking for investors that will help you invest in other teachers to learn your method so that you have more arms to get your program out to teach children how to read.
correct. Now, and they know it's not, it's an investment in the people. It's not an investment. They get back the satisfaction that now these children that were giving up on themselves have their dreams. There isn't one child that I have not taught to read. I will say yes to every child. I do put learning disabilities, children with ADHD, children with, but I have, and I've only taught 3 children with Down syndrome. So, but I have taught them to read. They don't usually finish the program, but that's what I teach, which a parent told me the best thing she'd ever seen is I teach their stories about things that they can do at home. So they want to have, their parent wants them to wash the clothes and they don't know how to read the words on the washer and what to do with that. So we do a story on that. Or it's going shopping and they need to buy some things. So the items that they need to buy are in their story. And those kinds of things, they have wonderful memories, the children with Down syndrome. And I can do that. But mostly it's for the children and for me to, as you say, spread my arms, because I can't do it all. And I can't travel all over. But if I have somebody in Detroit or in Chicago or 2 people in Atlanta, I have a person right now. If anybody from Atlanta is listening to this podcast, I have a person right now that's already trained, and I would just go there and work with that person. But what I do in my training is they learn about the philosophy and everything, but then I go with them to their place and work with them, with their children, with the beginning children, so they feel confident when a child says, I don't have anything, or I don't know anything, or what word do you want to use here? What's another word for, that they don't stop because they don't know what to say next.
Right.
So I'm actually
So
modeling.
you want to be very hands-on.
Yeah.
All right. How would people who've been listening to us find you? How would they reach you?
My website is writereadlead.org, www.writereadlead.org. And they can also reach me by phone number. My phone number is 858-487-7889. That's a landline that I keep because it sort of has more battery than my cell phone does. But once we get connected, I also want people to sponsor. If they want to sponsor a child, they may know a child whose parents are from low income and they can sponsor. They get a tax deduction when they sponsor. And it would be really beneficial to have people, teachers. They can volunteer to say, oh, I know a teacher that would love to work in your situation. And I'll give her, your name and you can have a chance to talk and see. I met somebody the other day that is retiring from doing little kindergarten, 1st grade. And she said, let's talk. I would like to know more about your program. But that,
and I've heard you speak a couple of times, and you either start off, and I want to do this so that people, if you think you might be interested in sponsoring Suki's program, the first question I've heard her ask is, can you imagine what it would be like if you couldn't read? Because I think we all understand that that would be pretty horrific. So to be able to give that opportunity to a child to have them be able to read would be very satisfactory. The other question that sometimes you ask is, can you imagine what it would be like to be a parent who has a child that's frustrated because they can't read? So if either of those talk to your heart, then consider supporting a student so that they can learn to read, or consider supporting Suki in getting other teachers to understand how to teach by her method so that you could be a part of something that is life-changing for a child. So,
and it's immediate life change. You know, it's kind of like, I think when you say that, I think of a child that long time ago was all frustrated, even working with me. And I said, I wrote one sentence and I said, read it back. And she said, I can't read. I said, what did you say to me? What did you tell me? And it was something like, I like spaghetti that my mom cooks, something like that. And she said, I said, you gave me a sentence. You told me what you liked. And she got like sort of perturbed. And I said, it's exactly written as you say. And then she said to me later, she said, but I can read my stories, but I can't read anybody else's. And I said, okay, well, let's just go here. And I took her to the lunchroom. And there were posters on the lunchroom. And I said, I want you to read this poster. What does it say? And the poster was more like children's intending. So the one sentence was, make sure that you stay in line. You know, make sure that you hand the volunteer your ticket, or make sure you have your ticket, those types of things. So she started to read, and then I said, you know, I said, the menu is here. Do you want to know what you want to have for lunch today? And she said, I can't. I said, see if you can. And she started to read the word hamburger on a bun. And her tears and frustration turned to her laughter. She was so joyous. And I said, now how do you feel? She said, she didn't tell me how she felt. She just looked at me and she said, thank you. And she put her arms around me. So it really changes people. And
so essentially what you're asking is if there's anyone out there that would like to change a little girl or a little boy's life by giving them the gift of reading.
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
Underneath this podcast, I'm going to put how you can get a hold of a copy of the digital magazine that's Read, Write, Lead. That's going to be
Write, Read, Lead.
Write, Read, Lead. Thank you. I always say that backwards, but that's going to be available to you if you want to learn more. Go to her website. It is jam-packed with great information that will explain to you the lives that have been touched by Dr. Suki and her teaching program. And then you have her phone number. You can reach her that way, or you can email her at Dr. Suki at.
Oh no, it's Dr. Stone at Write, Read.
Dr. Stone at Write, Read, Lead.
At writereadlead.org.
There you go.
So,
okay.
Yeah, I'll do it one more time.
And I'll put it all in writing right underneath this episode.
Dr. Stone, no dot, just DRSTONE at Write, WRITE, Read, READ, Lead, LEAD.org.
So you have all these ways, and then you'll be able to see right underneath this podcast. So thank you, Suki. I loved having you on my podcast. I'm so happy that you got to tell the story. And I hope there are people out there who know somebody who can use what you have done that could change their life, or would like to support a child to change their life. So thank you for joining me today for this Tell Me Your Story. Love you.
I love you dearly. Thank you for helping me share my story.